It's Drew Tessier's mostly queer comedy show. Let's talk, y'all.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Mostly Queer Comedy Podcast. Now, whenever I do my shows, I always like to have sort of an ally of the week. I run a weekly queer comedy show down at Greenwich Village Comedy Club. You've been my ally of the week. I am going to introduce you. I promise I'm getting to that. So Brennan Tasseff is going to be our first ally of the month on the podcast, on the show. I thought it was a very good first ally to have. I've done, well...
You're going to make me blush!
I also love that you showed up to my show in your merch.
Yeah, we'll plug it later. We'll plug it at the end of the show. Ex-Drinking Buddy Podcast. Check that out.
So, like every comedian in New York, he has a podcast now. I have a podcast.
You finally took the dive.
I have been wanting to do this for a while. Kind of get to... interview all my famous friends and pseudo-famous friends and friends on the way to fame and those
and then just your friends.
Those that will never make it. No, I'm kidding. But what I think is kind of cool about your comedy, you know, with most of the people that I interview, we're sort of diving into comedy and sexuality and sort of the idea of how those are tied together. And for me, it's always been tied together. It's sort of what kept me from getting on stage for so long. I didn't really get into stand-up comedy until I was like 38 years old. And because I didn't know how to get on stage and be gay, and I didn't know how to get on stage and not be gay, so I just didn't. So much of my material is tied into my sexuality, and I think that with you, ex-drinking buddy, so much of your material is tied into your sobriety.
Yeah.
I think it's very much sort of your...
brand. I've made it my entire brand. I cannot relapse now because it'll all crumble, and I did that on purpose. I insulated myself in sobriety. No, but it's interesting because I was never a set-up punch guy, and you know this from all the shows we've done together. I was always more of a storyteller, and I always found that the funniest comedy to me was the stories that were the most traumatic or the most eventful in a way, which always came back to my drinking.
And you were originally from Florida.
Yes. I was born in Ohio. I lived there for a month and then moved to Florida when I was 1 month old.
What part of Florida?
Daytona Beach, 386. Always represent.
And I know you've talked about... for the Florida people out there. It's for the basis. Actually, we'll get into that in a second because I did the Pensacola Queer Comedy Festival last year.
with Andrew.
With Andrew and...
friend of my podcast.
Well, sure, we'll get into it now then. Actually, I want to circle back to that. Florida. Because, like you said, you know, you say you're not a set-up punchline guy, which is sort of true. He can write a joke. But... I do find in Florida, you guys are used to just getting on stage and talking for like days at a time. I mean...
yeah, so it's very interesting. In Florida, I think in the South in general, it's a lot of... Atlanta probably being one of the exceptions. Atlanta is one of those cities where if you go there, you gotta go. Like, we're getting on stage, boom, boom, boom. But what I've noticed is because I came up in the comedy scene in Florida, I started in South Florida in 2009 and just kind of came up. I was in and out, obviously, of comedy between the arrests and jail time and rehabs and hospitals and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, it's a very much like, hey, y'all, we're here to show. We're here to listen. We want to, you know, be engaging. That's how a lot of the audiences are. So it gives you kind of carte blanche to just go and almost ramble at times, which...
punchlines are optional.
Yeah, as long as the story is kind of entertaining, they're fine with it.
Generally, how many comics on a show?
So we would still do like the normal time parameters, like 12 minutes or 15 minutes. So a lot of times it would be like, you know, 5, maybe 7 comics on a show. Yeah, so it wasn't anything crazy. But I came up also in the indie circuit. I wasn't... like you hear a lot of people listening to podcasts and stuff about comedy. This is the
Florida indie circuit we're discussing right now?
Well, what I mean by that is like there are clubs, and like a lot of people when they get into comedy, you get in at a club, and that's your home club, and then you MC, and then you feature, and then you start headlining at your club, and then you take that out onto the road. The circuit I kind of came up in was bar shows, was kind of like different venues, breweries, all sorts of like these weird kind of laundromats, pizza parlor, like all these weird kind of places. But it was just a bunch of friends who wanted to do stand-up. And in Jacksonville in particular, there was one club, and the owner did not like the indie comedy scene. It was you did his classroom or you didn't get on his stage. And that's the Comedy Zone in Jacksonville.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of a rebellion. All of us who had been doing comedy for a while, we're all like, well, fuck this guy. And so we just started doing shows anywhere and everywhere. And that kind of grew the scene. So when I came to New York, I was still all about like, I mean, you remember those first few mics. I was like telling stories and I wasn't even halfway through. And then you're giving me the light. And I was like, oh, this is different up here.
So I run 8 open mics in New York every week. And Brennan's at a lot of my open mics.
Yes.
And humble brag, I feel like we have some of the best open mics in the city. I feel like people do really come to try to work, and it's a kind of a supportive environment.
Absolutely.
And I never wanted to run completely queer open mics, but I do. It's a mix. We get women and men and the bros and all together, and I feel like if you can come into this room and bring your material and sort of be ready to hang with all the different types of comedians, you're going to get more out of it that way than sort of keeping it. And so I do also see the value of an all-queer mic. I go to some all-queer mics. It's fun. It's interesting you said with Jacksonville, the one guy, I find that's a trend in almost every city. I hear that over and over again, is sort of the one club and the one dude that's kind of the gatekeeper of who gets to go up on stage. And I think there's sort of another parallel with the queer community, because it took so long before they would allow gay comedians to get up on stage, or if they did, it was like, oh, we have our one queer comic, we're good. We did have to find our own laundromats and pizza places and gay bars and whatnot.
That's something I want to tell the listeners. I'm sure you've talked about this on previous episodes, but the fact that you started the festival and everything like that was a beacon of hope, because like where I'm from, other people have started to do that. As you were talking about earlier with Andrew, like he started his own festival in Pensacola.
Andrew Fiera.
Yeah. But a lot of that is based on this idea of like you said, like, no, we'll just do it ourselves, which I commend you a lot, because when I had you on my podcast and we were talking about it, I was like, so wait, you just started and you're like, yeah. And I was like, so this whole thing, everything you see about it, you're like, yeah, that's mine. And I was like, that's insane.
Well, when you first get into comedy, New York is so hard because there are, even as long as I've been in it, which is not super long, I came into it late, I would say roughly 5-6 years. I still find pockets of comedy in this city that I didn't know about.
It's insane.
There are just groups that do their own thing, and I don't get out much a whole lot either, because I work for Greenwich Village and Broadway comedy clubs. I was passed at Stand Up New York, although they're moving to an Italian restaurant in Times Square or something. I don't completely understand it yet, but mainly, I'm in those 2 clubs. So I find when you're first getting into comedy, there's 2 types of currency that you have to try to get in. Either a ton of friends that can get you onto other people's shows, or stage time, that you can offer other people. So actually, before I even did the Queer Comedy Festival, the first thing I produced in New York was a Southern show of all comics that went to SEC schools.
Okay. You goddamn right.
Which I need to bring back. Now, did you go to college?
Yeah, I went to Florida Atlantic University. Go
FAU.
Owls.
All right, cool.
Conference USA, so not SEC, but we're in Florida.
Well, when I was still in,
I played against Auburn.
True?
Yeah, year after Cam Newton left.
Oh yeah,
They
that
won
makes
the
sense that
national
we would have.
championship, and then we played against them, lost 48-7.
Did you graduate?
Yeah, 2012.
What was your major?
Political science and American history.
Interesting.
Yeah, I got a 164 on the LSAT. I was going to go to law school.
And now all this.
Here we are. Well, apparently, when you do a lot of cocaine and drink every single day.
Okay, so I want to get all this in chronological order. So you played football at FAU.
Yep.
When I was still in the cheerleading world, I've had a few lives, but I used to work for the National Cheerleading Association. There was a whole crew of Miami cheerleaders. I don't know if any of them ever got degrees, but they would transfer together to a different FAU, FIU, Miami-Dade, University of Miami, so they could get a championship ring in every single division.
That's hilarious.
Again, I don't know if any of them have degrees, but they got a shelf full
of rings.
Shelf full of rings. So you went to high school. Mm-hmm. Then you went to college. So you must have still been doing okay in college if you could have managed to play games and graduate.
Yeah, well, what ended up happening was, just a quick backstory for the listeners. I was bullied a lot. You've seen it. I talk about it on stage. I've got scars all over my body. I used to hurt myself because I was so depressed and anxious, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And I got to college. I took a semester off between high school and college because I didn't get a full scholarship offer from anybody. So I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I wanted to play Division I football, but everyone's like, oh, you could just walk on, which means basically you just are still paying for your full school, but you get the shit kicked out of you as a practice.
But we can still break you.
Yeah. And then through a few happenstance circumstances, FAU offered me a partial scholarship. So they said, well, we want you to come here. We'll pay for your books and your meal plan and stuff like that, but you just have to pay for your tuition. And as an in-state student, I was like, oh, that's like $1,200 a semester, no problem. So I got to FAU, and when I got there, I was like, I'm not going to get bullied anymore. I'm going to change the narrative. And a lot of people talk about that, but I did it. The first week I was there, I was in an elevator with a friend of mine going up to her dorm room, and these other football players were in the elevator. Now, practice hadn't started yet, so they didn't know I was on the team. Excuse me. And they, kind of came at me. Like, who the fuck are you? Why are you in our dorm? And I came right back because I was like, I'm not going to get bullied. And it worked. I stood up for myself, and it worked. And I was like, oh, my God, I should have just been doing that the whole time. So as a freshman in college, it was a great experience. I was on the team. I was taking all these, junior and senior level courses because I loved political science and history so much. And as an athlete, you know this from Auburn, they just let you take whatever you want.
Right.
So there is no you have to take these classes first. So the long-winded reason I graduated was because I took the hardest classes possible for my degrees as a freshman and a sophomore. So then by the time I stopped playing football, when I got my 8th major concussion, and they're like, you can't play anymore. This is when all this stuff was coming out and the NFL was getting sued and all this stuff. They're like, you're never going to start. You're barely on special teams. You're going to die. You can't do this.
Right.
So I left the team and started drinking and partying all the time. And it was at that point where my classes were intro to literature. It was bullshit prerequisite classes. So I was able to pass those barely. D is passing in Florida. So I was able to pass those. And that's why I was able to end up graduating in the end.
Yeah, I think I had sort of a similar track, only mine was with theater. So I took all my hard classes the first year, and then, by the time...
Yeah, so by the time I was it was so funny, too, because I took that semester off. I was a year older, and it took me 5 years to graduate because of all the drinking and drugging and stuff. So by the time my last semester, I was 23, 24, and I'm in a room with 17 and 18-year-olds because it's a prereq. So it's all these freshmen in this class. And I'm looking around I'm not supposed to be here.
So, obviously you drank in high school. We're in the South. Everybody drinks in high school.
I didn't drink until late in my senior year.
See, that's wild to me. Because, I was...
I'm not kidding. When I said I have 2 sisters who are both very popular and an older brother who's much older. All of them were incredibly popular. And I talk about this in my one-man show. They would go out and drink with their friends and have parties and stuff. I am not kidding. I would sit in my room, and when I was little, I'd play with action figures, and then as I got older, it was video games, and then I got really into movies and TV, and I've got 20 minutes of material on that. I was a loner. I'm still, to this day, very much a loner. And I saw what drinking did to my friends and family. Some people would get aggressive, some people would lie, some people would cheat and steal and all this stuff. So I was drinking is a poison. I'm never going to do that. And then my senior year... my twin sister was like, hey, I'm going to have some friends over at Dad's house when he's out of town. Do you want to come? And me and my twin, up to this point, barely spoke.
That's odd
for
twins.
It was, but again, I didn't speak to anybody. It's not on them, it's on me. I just wanted to be by myself because I didn't know. I obviously with my anxiety, I just wanted to be alone because that's where I felt comfortable. And so I was like, yeah, I'll come. And it was 99 bananas late in my senior year. And I did one shot of that, and I talked to another comic about this, because I used to be drinking so bad. And then I did one shot, and with that very first shot, my anxiety just went away, and I was like, oh, I get it now. I get it. This makes sense why everybody does this all the time. This is awesome.
Bananas. Yeah. This is why you're on the gay podcast. This is
fantastic.
I had a really bad run-in with some peach schnapps in high school one time, but the very first, I can't harsh you. The very first time I got drunk, was Zima, and I will have to live on that.
You told that story on my podcast.
Oh, did I?
In fact, the title of the episode is Zima Made Me Gay.
It was the 90s. We didn't know what we were doing. So I drank a lot in high school. So you didn't party super hard in high school. And then do you feel like football, while you were still active on the team, that sort of gave you the sense of purpose that kept you?
That's exactly what it was I'm an addict by nature. And you see it with comedy, in my podcast. At one point I had 3 podcasts. I was doing stand-up and still had a job. When I devote myself to something, it's we're going. We're either going to go all in or not at all. And that's how I was with football. And I would still party with my friends, which was a happy byproduct of actually being I'm not going to get bullied. I'm going to make friends. I'm going to do this. And like I said, I actually changed my life and did that. So I would still party with people, but then when I left football, there was just a vacuum because I was like, well, I have all this extra time and energy, and I should have, sitting here talking about it, I should have put it into my studies. I should have done something
You can't
else.
look at your 20s and use the word shoulda.
I know.
mean, it's just
I know.
impossible.
It's just, it is one of those funny things because obviously I'm a stand-up comic and podcaster who lives in New York City. So if you would have told 22-year-old me that, I'd be like, yeah, whatever you got to do to get there, I'll do that. So at the end of the day, I can't be mad at it. But at the same time, it's one of those things where I was like, oh, you know what I can do now? I can drink with my friends more.
Right.
And as an addict, and I do the bit about gaining the 100 pounds in 3 months, but that was true. I gained 80 pounds in 3 months because I was drinking every single day and I was going to Taco Bell for dinner, and it just got out of control.
And then
in a very short time.
So you've graduated college.
Yeah.
That's sort of when alcohol really took it. So what age are you around this time?
So by the time I graduate, I'm like I'm 22, 23.
Yeah, you're still pretty young.
Yeah, I was 23 when I graduated because I graduated high school at 17, so that's why I'm saying it took 5 years to graduate college. I had gotten a DUI my senior year of college, my second senior year of college, and then I got hit by a car on a bicycle going to take a final, which is important because so I had my DUI when I finished my final semester.
So that's why you were on a bike, because you
Yeah.
weren't allowed to drive at the time. Yeah.
And so my final semester at school, we literally packed up our whole apartment because South Florida is expensive and I couldn't afford to live there without student loans and stuff like that anymore. So me and a buddy of mine who I moved in with, we both lived in the Northeast Florida area. And so I said, listen, man, you rent the U-Haul, I'll split it with you. I can't drive, we'll load it up. You drop me off at my mom's house and then you go about your way. And he's like, yeah, no problem. So I went to my probation officer for my first DUI and I was like, hey, I'm moving. I can't afford to stay here anymore. She was like, oh, you have to go in front of the judge to like get this all straightened out. And I said, okay, no problem. Walked out of the probation office, got in the U-Haul, and just left. So I skipped out on my probation with 6 months left in South Florida.
And then when did you get hit by a car?
I got hit by a car a few months before that. So then I moved back home, and I stayed with my mom for like a month, and I was like, oh, I can't do this. So I moved in with a friend, and that's the one I talk about on stage. My best friend Marquise, who I'd known since I got my first job at 14, I say it in the one-man show. He always tells me I'm going to wake up one day and realize we need to be together forever. So he let me stay with him, and I was sleeping on a lounge chair, like one of those beach lounge chairs,
Sure.
in the living room of his studio apartment. And that's where I was sleeping. And then my mom called and said, hey, your check's here because I got a settlement.
Okay, first of all, if there was a living room, it was a one-bedroom apartment.
Well,
Don't embellish.
We make do with what we have. The room that had the blow-up couch in it, which we called the living room. But my mom called and was like, because after I got hit by the car, I obviously hired lawyers and stuff. So it was like a year later after initially getting hit by the car, or maybe 2 years, and she was like, hey, I have your check from your lawyers. And there's obviously, it's a much longer story, but the gist is she handed me a check for $26,000.
And that's, you blew through it, strip clubs.
28 days, yeah. That's the one I spent. I spent, in Daytona Beach, Florida, I spent $26,000 in less than a month.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. And then I got back into comedy.
That one you might look back on with a little bit of should have. But,
yeah. DUI, fuck that.
So, how old were you when you did your first open mic? Is that how you started comedy?
Yeah, I started comedy 2009. I was 21 years old because I thought you had to be 21 to go to the club.
So you were still a drunk.
So I stopped playing college football, and then literally within like 2 months, I was like, I say it all the time, I've been into comedy since I was 12.
Yeah.
And so once football was over with and taken from me, I was like, I'm going to try and do stand-up. And so it was a few months after I had left the team. I did my first open mic 2009, drunk out of my mind. Cisco Dern, who still does comedy in South Florida, was the host. And I went up, and I still have the notebook that I was writing in from that set, and it is horrific. I was trying to be like a bro-y frat boy shock jock kind of comedy. And you know me personally, that's not who I am. But I was
going to say,
trying
it seems like that's sort of, on stage, off stage, sort of been a challenge for you, it sounds like forever, is sort of this idea of presenting as sort of a jockey bro type, and then kind of deep down being a sensitive nerd.
Well, and that's the thing is I always forget that for people who know me, they know I'm a sensitive nerd. But I present just by the pure aesthetic. I present as like, oh, what's up, bro? And it's like, nah, I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because I've done shows before where my friends will bring their significant others, and then my friends will go, "Oh, that was so good," and their significant others like, "I thought it kind of sucked," because they don't know me, so they don't get the humor in it. Which is another good thing about having a podcast, because people can really get to know you. But yeah, 2009 is when I started.
And so was it I've always wanted to do comedy, I'm going to go find the opportunity to do it, or was it sort of you saw signposted for open? I mean,
No. It was definitely the former before the latter. It was. I mean, and I say this on my show all the time. If anyone's listening to this from my show, they're going to be so sick of hearing it. But I started watching comedy at 12. My cousin introduced me to Comedy Central Presents.
Okay.
I would record those on VHS every Friday on Comedy Central and just watch them on a loop, because at the time, and still to this day, I had so many issues with my anxiety and depression. I was in awe that someone could stand on a stage with just a microphone and help me to forget about all the crazy shit that was going on in my head, and I could just laugh. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but this is astounding to me. There's nothing else. It's just a microphone, and the guy's and the woman's, man's, whoever's words can make me forget about wanting to fucking die. And to me, that was so powerful, but I was like, I could never do that. Like watching Mitch Hedberg, it's hilarious, but I'm like, I can't. Like, that's totally out of my... And then this is probably the most broiest thing about me. I saw Dane Cook do his Comedy Central Presents, where he rips his shirt off and pours the bottle of water over his head, and I went, I want to do that.
Huh.
And that's how I got into stand-up. I've always had a good stage presence.
So I was one generation before the Comedy Presents. When I was junior high, stand-up spotlight hosted by Rosie O'Donnell on VH1.
And you have that great bit you're doing about that,
which I need to bring back.
Yeah, because it's a powerful bit, and I was telling Aiden about this, but it's a very powerful bit in more ways than one, and those are the things I love, where it's like, yeah, it's funny on the surface, but also it's got a much deeper meaning, because...
I have to figure out how to make it work. I've played with it a little bit. So this is actually a true story. And also to sort of catch everybody up to speed here, Brennan works at a restaurant. Mm-hmm. My boyfriend Aiden works at a restaurant. Brennan got Aiden the job as a host at his restaurant, and now Aiden is his boss.
My boss.
This has all happened in a very short amount of time.
Yes, it has.
Aiden's a little bit younger than I am. So his friends are Zoomers, and he is so a Zoomer. So we were out, and it was me and him and two lesbian friends, and very young, and I think we were playing some sort of game of like celebrities you would bang or something like that.
Yeah, Celebrity Crush or something.
And somebody said Ellen DeGeneres, and both of the young lesbians were like, "Ooh, gross, fuck her, she sucks." And I was like, "Wait, what?" I mean, because like my earliest, I'm going to ask you yours in a second. I think my earliest comic influences would have been, Chris Rock, Rosie O'Donnell, Rosie O'Donnell as well, because she hosted Stand Up Spotlight. Yep. But Ellen, I think my style is most influenced by Ellen DeGeneres and Eddie Izzard.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't ever get into the show. Daytime television's for morons. I'm not even defending like any of that, but when she was still doing her stand-up comedy, one, I love how clean she can be. Mm-hmm. And just her style of sort of kicking a dead horse. And it's not everybody can pull it off. I find it hilarious. Some people don't love it. But anyway, I thought at least the young lesbians are going to love Ellen DeGeneres, and the whole thing with her being canceled and mean to her staff. And
it was the mean thing.
Right. And I think, they're like, we don't like her because she's mean.
Yeah.
And I was like, I find that sexist because, we don't ever talk about whether... Johnny Carson was a nice guy. He probably wasn't to his staff, But this is the same treatment that Rosie O'Donnell got, which was, the queen of nice, and then turns out she's not nice to her staff. Fuck that dyke. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like it's exactly the same thing that happened to Ellen DeGeneres, which is and I think part of the problem is trying to brand queer women as nice. And then when they sort of start to cave under the pressure of running a huge show day after day, and they're not as nice as they present, then they're mean and we should cancel them. And I really felt like I'm hitting all these points, and then I punctuated it with, and honestly, I hope she came in every day and called her entire staff a bunch of retards. And that is where I lost the Zoomers.
You had it.
I know. I'm a product of the 90s. I've genuinely comedy made a real effort to erase it from my vocab, both on and off stage. But, I was just watching Reality Bites the other day,
Oh, God.
and Janine Garofalo says retards. And I mean, it was so in the 90s. And I think in the same way that, thank you, Trey and Parker, Trey Parker.
And Matt Stone.
Sorry, yeah. Making, everything gay in the early 2000s. I think, oh, that's gay. I hated it, for the same reason, when you really boil it down to the subtext, which is you're saying that things are gay, therefore it's bad, and you're equating homosexuality with bad. But I don't think most people really were thinking of it that way. It was just
I
like
agree.
saying it's stupid. And so when we were saying retarded, I don't think we were actually referencing okay, I'm gonna get off that. But anyway, that was the story with. So your influence. Who were your first comics?
So,
that really...
like I was saying, it was the Dane thing was. So the first comedic influence I had were Tom Rhodes, Mitch Hedberg, were two of the ones that really stick out. Patrice O'Neill, Greg Giraldo, like all these ones that Comedy Central like had on all the time.
Greg Giraldo.
I would just watch constantly. But then, like I said, the thing that clicked in my head where I was like, I'm going to do stand-up was Dane's first album, Harmful If Swallowed. And you have to remember, at the time, I was in high school, and everyone was passing around that burned CD. It wasn't Red Hot Chili Peppers. It wasn't Eminem. It was Dane's Harmful If Swallowed in 2004 when it came out. Everyone listened to it. It was like, the Kool-Aid Man bit, and it changed a lot of people's lives. And to me, that means a lot because it opened the door for stand-up for so many other people. I say this all the time. When I'm at a show and a comic goes after a heckler, and as comics, we're sitting in the back, and you can tell when they go too hard.
Right.
In my head, my first reaction is, that person will never go watch live comedy ever again in their life.
Oh, interesting. You're such a sweetheart.
But that's
Brennan.
like, because it means a lot to
Yeah.
me. And so it's one of those things where, so Dane was the reason I got into it. And now, like, as I've grown up, I like storytellers. So Bill Burr's always been a big one for me because he tells stories. And sometimes he does things that I get angry about, but he says it in like a funny way, like do you recognize me? No, because I don't fucking work here. And it's like, how many times have we all wanted to say that to somebody when they're like, oh no, it's right over there. And it's like, I don't. And then
what about like Berbiglia?
Berbiglia was, so Segura's probably another big one. Matt Fulstron was another big one. But Berbiglia was different for me as someone who I wanted to do. When I found out what Berbiglia was doing, like with the Sleepwalk with Me and stuff, that changed. I wouldn't call him a comedic influence. He's more of just a career influence.
All right.
That kind of changed my whole, where I was like, oh, that was him and Josh Wolf were the two biggest inspirations for me to do my whole, I didn't direct it, but do my whole one-man show. Was I was like, oh, we can do dramatic stuff that has funny stuff in it. Like, we don't have to be all the time. Like, we can talk about stuff that we hold near and dear. So Berbiglia is on like a different thing. I wouldn't say like a different level as far as like my hero, but it's just it's for him it's not comedy. It's like that whole thing, like the one man shows and the like finding the humor and tragedy and all that stuff. Because you know me, I mean, you say it all the time. All my bits end in tragedy, but it is one of those things where Berbiglia is huge. Berbiglia and Burr are probably the two biggest right now.
Well, I mean, end in tragedy, sore, but I find I think you are a tremendously positive human being. And I think it's so funny because I think you still see a lot of the struggles that you went through as part of your identity and almost how you might think other people see you. And I mean, I'll give you an example of how people view Brennan. So I went down to do the Pensacola Queer Comedy Festival, which is a sentence onto itself. And again, we've already mentioned Andrew. It is full of heart from him. This is a project of love. And I think it's important that there is a queer comedy festival in Florida because that's where they need it more than anything. And yes, there were challenges. There were challenges. Oh yeah, sure, and it's true. We don't have the. I'm not starting the Alabama Queer Comedy Festival or anything. There were challenges to the Pensacola Queer Comedy Festival, as you could imagine, but that is, I believe, on Florida, not on Andrew, because he really wants to bring people together. Even if they're straight Florida comics that we're calling allies that take liberties with using the word faggot on stage. But so I went down there to do this festival and met Dallas.
James Nelson.
Right. who is adorable, and just a real sweetheart. And I swear to God, his lip was quivering when he was describing you. I mean, like, apparently, was he heavy as well? Was he?
Yeah, he was real big.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I just saw a picture of him the other day. It looks like he's actually gotten an even better.
Yeah, he's lost a lot of weight. Dallas has gone through a bit of a journey, and I had him on my show when I first started doing the show in Florida. He was a guest twice in the early days. But yeah, Dallas. I mean, Dallas now, like everybody. I'm very much, like I said, because especially with comedians, because I hold this so close to my heart. I'll do anything for a comic.
So you took him to the gym for the first time.
Yep. We started going. So Dallas originally was in the Air Force. He was in linguistics. He speaks like 4 different languages, including Arabic and Farsi.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think also, I mean, I want to interview him at some point
Yeah.
as well, but his
kid.
parents made him do conversion
Therapy.
therapy.
Yeah, he grew up. His dad was a
Christ.
minister, a cowboy, literally a cowboy, and did rodeos and stuff like that. But yeah, you have him on. He can tell the story. But he came to me because my whole identity was sober. So I started doing comedy in 2009. I took a break when drinking and drugs got really bad. Then I came back into comedy. I went to rehab in 2013, started doing comedy again. And then in 2015, when I relapsed, I was like, I'd embarrassed myself so badly. I was like, I'm not going to touch a stage until I can get sober, because I destroyed every bridge. I fucking burnt everything down that I'd built in comedy up to that point. So then I got sober in 2018, and I came back into comedy in the Jacksonville scene, and Dallas was there. But now my whole identity was being sober, because, and like I said in the beginning, I did that on purpose, because not only was I holding myself accountable, but I don't have that much respect for myself. I wanted other people to have to hold me accountable as well. So Dallas knew that, and probably a year and a half after Dallas and I had become friends, he had mentioned that he was getting kind of sick and tired of being sick and tired, and he was drinking too much, and he was out of shape because he used to be super fit. He was, in the military. So I was like, well, why don't you start coming to the gym with me? As naturally as an addict, I still to this day go to the gym 6 days a week. I was like, come with me. So we started going, and it just reinvigorated this whole thing in his life. And he cut out drinking. He moved back to help his grandparents. He lost all this weight.
No, I mean to
And
tell
then you
you,
said you ran into him, and he was
I said I'm from New York. His very first question is, "Do you know Brennan Tasseff?" And I said I do. And then, literally spoke to you about you as though you were a saintly figure. As you're beloved in Florida, and I think you're an incredibly generous person, which is rare in performance. It's rare in comedy. It's rare in New York. But yet, so much of your comedy is so fucking dark.
Yeah.
Um,
I do that on purpose. I mean, it is. I do have fun, and I can be silly on stage and stuff like that. We were talking about this earlier, but I'm going to start submitting the Greenwich Village show that I did that you were so gracious to have me on. I actually did really well. I did so well to the point where Drew was texting Aiden, Brennan's actually really crushing right now.
I didn't say actually, for starters. I said Brennan is crushing
I did
now.
so well, though, and I was so grateful because I had Melissa Harris film that set in her 4K camera, and I now have that set, which is good because I'm going to submit it to festivals. But I was watching that set back, and it was interesting because even when I talk about being bipolar and being diagnosed, I'm always trying to throw in an all shucks, literally, and trying to be silly. But the whole idea of my comedy, and I talk about this all the time, and people hate it, and I'm pretentious, and I understand that. But the whole idea of my comedy is that I want to do for other people what was done for me.
Same. I love that.
Which was the idea of all these people who want to laugh at dick jokes and masturbation, and you talk about it all the time. People ask me how can I sit through 8 mics a week and blah blah blah, and it's you'd be surprised how many times people can talk about masturbation differently.
But all the different takes on being stoned,
right? But for me, it's that's not, if that's your kind of comedy, more power to you. That's why these people have millions of Instagram followers. That's why they're selling out theaters and stuff. That's not what I'm doing. Right. What I'm doing is I want to create for people who are like me, who at certain points in their life are I don't know if this is worth it. And then they watch my set and go, hey, I felt that same way, and he made it funny, and I like that.
I'm not being a dick right now. I mean this in all sincerity. Have you ever considered motivational speaking?
Yeah, people, especially after I did the one-man show, people talked about that.
No, I think you'd be great at it.
I know, but I just don't like the way it's framed. I like being a stand-up I like being a dark storyteller versus a motivational speaker. And stand up
down
like
by the river.
yeah. Living in a van down by the river.
Now I've ruined it. Now you're never going to really consider it.
No, I mean motivational speaking is good, but that's not. I think that's a different lane entirely. Like I like being at comedy club because at the end of the day, as much as people might not like my stand up, at the end of the day, I don't give a shit what anybody says. It's structured as jokes. It might not be set up punch, but there are tags in it. There are certain observations in it. Like it is stand up. And it might be a different style than what people like, but it's fucking stand up. Do you see how defensive I get when people say motivational? I'm like, you're out of your fucking mind.
I do. Well, you've already mentioned being bipolar. You do have one of my favorite jokes, which is I mean, you can tell it, but the Gemini.
Yeah. So growing up, I grew up around women. Like I said, I was raised around sisters. They were really into astrology, and I have wild mood swings. So growing up, everyone was like, "Oh, Brennan, typical Gemini." And then I went to rehab, and science has a different word for it. They call it bipolar 2.
That's a great joke.
Yeah. Which is not as much fun as being like typical Gemini.
So he's talking about the set. He was on my show recently as the Ally of the Week, and you brushed lightly on a story of having cohabitated with somebody for a while and pretending to be a boyfriend or...
Yeah, so this is interesting because I played it all wrong. When you had me on as the Ally of the Week, I was like, I've got a great story to talk about. I'll talk about Marquise, whom I mentioned earlier, who actually is the reason I'm even in New York today. He saved my life. I talk about it in my one-man show.
That's the lawn chair in the living room?
The lawn chair, yeah. He was the one who found me when I gave myself severe alcohol poisoning and I was literally dying in a bathroom. He found me and rushed me to the hospital, and then the rest is history. But when I was 13 or 14 years old, I started working at McDonald's, and Marquise was there. And we'd always flirt back and forth. I am a whore for attention, so I don't care who's giving it to me. I'll flirt with anybody. So we were flirting back and forth, and we developed a really good friendship.
Romance.
And yeah, a bit of a romance. And it turned into one of those things where I was so young at the time, and I grew up in kind of this, household where, we're Eastern European, like my whole family's from Ohio. Like I just never thought, could I be gay? Like that. It was just not an option present. And you grew up in the South. No. It's just not, you have the whole bit of, homo disbelieving. It just like wasn't a thing that was talked about. So as Marquise and I's relationship kind of developed and friendship developed, I often was like, maybe I am in love with him. Maybe we are supposed to be together. And then it turned into a thing where I kind of found my way in life and I was like, I'm not. And so this is why it always blows my mind when people are like, it's a choice. It's like, no, because I have someone who cares about me more than anything in the world and would do anything for me, but I can't be with that person because it just, it doesn't feel right to me.
I can't imagine what that poor dude went through.
So we still go through it because we've had to sit down in the conversation, but there was a point when I was 22 and I graduated and I was living at home with my mom and I was like, I don't know what to do, where him and I moved in together. And that's where I was living on the lawn chair. And then when I got the money from my settlement, I went and got my own apartment. And then he came and lived with me. And he was there. I was getting hammered every day. And he was there taking care of me. And...
oh, that poor fucker.
Because this is going to come off this is going to make me look like shit. But I'm going to say it anyway because, I'm a beacon of honesty. Sometimes in jokes, people are like, say it like this, it's funnier. And I go, it's not how it happened, so I'm not going to do that. But
I'm not a stickler for truth.
But it was an interesting thing where he would take care of me and stuff, and he goes, why don't you just tell people why don't you just tell people I'm your boyfriend? And so I just started doing that, and because genuinely in that moment I was like, yeah, why can't I be gay? Like why can't we be together? He's looked out for me for over a decade, at this point, almost a decade. Like we were so close, we had so much in common. He was always so sweet to me, and I was sweet to him. He always
nothing physical ever took place.
No, I would give him kisses all the time and stuff like that, but there was no making out or anything physical like that. But it was.
You slept on your own lawn chair.
Well, so when I was living with him, I slept on my own lawn chair, and then when he moved into my place. Certain nights where I would get so drunk, he would put me in his bed with him and just cuddle with me. But for the most part, we slept in separate rooms. But it did get to a point where I honestly was like, yeah, I've never actually had this conversation with myself. Because I'm assuming that's why people come out so much later in life is because they just never thought about it. And then they're like, why am I so unhappy?
Well, this is a fascinating conversation. I mean, this was sort of
took us 39 minutes to get here.
The rise currently of sort of pansexuality as opposed to bisexuality, which is the idea that you fall in love with a person, not necessarily with. So, I had a dude in my circle for a moment. The circle, I don't know what that means, but in my orbit for a moment that it sounds almost identical. I mean, I guess he might sort of consider himself pansexual, mainly into women, although that seems to be a mess for him as well, but liked to snuggle and was very comfortable with it wasn't even like it was like the physical thing that was a deal breaker for him. But sexuality is fascinating.
Yeah, it was interesting to me too because it was one of those things where I would try to be like, yeah, this makes sense. Like we literally, as Forrest Gump would say, we fit together like peas and carrots, man. Like it was. But then the thing that was the problem I don't even want to say problem, but the thing that was the issue was just the issue of the physicality thing.
Right.
It made me uncomfortable. And by making me uncomfortable, I knew, this isn't where I am. And like I said, I'm incredibly comfortable in my own sexuality to the point where I can flirt with anybody or I can joke back and forth with anybody. And I don't get weirded out by contact or touching or even like...
Even Ethan?
Yeah. Like you see it with me and Ethan. Like I'm not like, hey, what the fuck? Like it genuinely doesn't bother me. And I've gotten to the point now in my maturity at 36 where I can actually say, if Ethan is starting to do stuff that does bother me, I go, hey man,
Ethan Filler is another comic. Ethan was a finalist in the New York Queer Comedy Festival this year. He's actually been on your podcast.
Yes, he has.
And Ethan,
a lot of people you're gonna have
sexually harasses Brennan in a restraining order sort of level of. But
yeah, so like it's never bothered me. But then that was the thing where it was very interesting to find out. Because people will live there, and I say this with comedy all the time, people will live their entire lives and just not know. Whether it's what they want to do with their lives, whether it's their sexuality. People live entire lifetimes and just never figure it out. And I don't know if it's because they're not trying or if I don't know if they just never had the opportunity. I've been fortunate enough in my life, I've lived like 5 lifetimes.
Oh, I feel like I haven't even started to understand myself sexually until after 40.
Yeah.
I mean, like I think it is a journey, and you meet somebody new and you try something different, and then you feel like, I mean, I've had entire relationships that
learning experience.
That were but also just we spent so much time beating our heads against the wall trying to figure out what was not working sexually, and it was just that we just weren't compatible, and that was it.
And that's okay.
It wasn't lack of passion, it wasn't lack of respect, it wasn't lack of trying, but just literally into different things.
Yeah.
And it's so different between meeting somebody that sure, I'll do that for you because you like it, versus fuck yeah, I like that too. That's a completely different,
I know.
When you meet a freak that's sort of a similar kind of freak, that's a whole new ballgame.
It's definitely a game changer because I've met freaks before, and I just want to say this and have it on the record, especially on this podcast, because I think it's important. It's not, for me to say it just wasn't for me is not in any way sort of degrading or like putting down any sort of lifestyle for anybody else. I'm just saying it's not for me, and it's okay.
Brennan Tasseff hates homosexuals,
but it is interesting because I've been with when I talk about it on stage, like my ex who was doing porn and stuff like that. It's weird because everyone now that I have that bit out there and I've been talking about, people are like, dude, how lucky were you? Like, was she? And to be honest with you, I'll be honest with you and the listeners, Drew, I'm not into that kind of stuff. Like, I would much rather be with someone. I'm boring when it comes to that kind of stuff.
See, but that's why I think you need a strong dom woman to just grab you by the fucking ears.
Probably. Because my ex would do stuff, be like, oh, do you want to watch, let's watch porn. And then we'd put it on, and my anxious ass the whole time is thinking, oh, she's just looking at this guy. She just wants to be with this guy and not me.
Yeah, you got to let go of that.
I know! I mean, that's what I have in my head. And luckily, my girlfriend now, we're very, like you said, we're very on similar wavelengths when it comes to that kind of stuff.
How old are you now?
30. I'll be 36 in May.
Yeah, I was still insecure in my 30s. I was still figuring shit out. I mean, I feel like I'm still just kind of figuring out what I'm into, and like I said, just the amount. I've been in relationships that just the dark cloud that formed over our bed after a while. I mean, just the feeling of dread of like, fuck, and it
I know
just
exactly
really came down to everybody coming with their A game, trying to give the other person what they wanted, but just not really being compatible in that way.
And it's important to find that, because there are certain, I mean, in my experience, I mean, I've been in a relationship for years where you're like, oh, this isn't, like 6 months in, you go, oh, this isn't going to work. But I don't like confrontation, and I'm anxious, and I have horrific abandonment issues because of my parents' divorce and things that happened with that. So I'm like, well, I guess I'm just going to hang out here then until they break up with me, because I'm not going to do this. And I did that like in my 20s and even in my early 30s. And now at 36, it's like, oh, no, that's not.
Have you ever broken up with somebody else?
Yeah, I've broken up with people. It's funny. Every serious relationship I've had, like the last relationship I had, I say I broke up with her, but there's a really funny bit that Sam Morrill's doing right now. But she cheated on me, so it's like, did you really break up with her? Or did she kind of draw that line in the sand?
Soft quit.
Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, I broke up with her. But I mean, obviously, because of that, she broke up with me. I've broken up with like people I've met on apps and stuff like that, and gone on a couple dates with, and then been like, oh, this isn't working out. But I've always been the breakup-y, be it through the cheating or through like my ex-fiance leaving because my addiction she just couldn't handle it anymore. And to her credit, she got out, which was, some people don't. And so I've mainly been the broke-up-y.
Is your girlfriend sober?
No. She doesn't drink a whole lot, but she's not sober. She just doesn't. She power lifts and I power lift, so that's kind of a cool thing. And we're both pretty conscious about like what we eat and stuff like that. So she's real big on not wanting to take in empty calories for no reason.
That's cool.
Which is good because my ex drank a lot and it didn't bother me because my last drunk was so horrific. It's like, oh, if I'm gonna drink, I'm gonna drink. Like no one's gonna stop me. But I have no reason to drink because like I literally woke up in a hospital dying. So it was like, yeah, maybe not for me. But it's never bothered me. But my ex-fiance was a mean drunk, and that was hilarious because I was drinking at the time with her, and I'd get drunk and be all happy and giggly, and she'd be like screaming at me, and I'd be like, "What's going on?"
I'm a happy drunk.
Yeah, me too. Gotta be.
Yeah, I don't really harbor a whole lot of dark shit. Like usually, I mean, I go to a point and then I hit a point where I'm like, all right, I have about 10 minutes before I need to be in bed.
Yeah.
But I'm a pretty happy drunk.
Yeah, I think it says a lot about like what's going, like you said, like what's going on in a person's life. I mean, towards the end of my drinking, I drank alone, and that was by design because again, that goes back to the childhood feelings of wanting to just be by myself. But whenever I was around people, I was for the most part happy, except in college. Sometimes in college, you just get in fights for no reason.
And you've never done hallucinogenics, you've never done mushrooms, you've never done
I have
LSD.
never done hallucinogenics. I've done heroin, crack, cocaine, and Molly, or ecstasy is what we called it back then. And then
So just the pussy stuff,
weed and, yeah, weed and booze. Yeah, I snorted heroin, smoked crack, and then I snorted a lot of cocaine.
Yeah, I don't like uppy shit anyway.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, crack, I say it all the time, don't ever do it because that's the kind of thing where...
I think that's a good policy.
Yeah, but I mean, we say it like half joking, but like that high you get from cocaine over doing it over the course of like a night maybe, you get that in a very condensed version for like 30 minutes when you smoke, and you're like when I did it, I was like, oh, I'm never going to do it. Like, this is the greatest thing ever.
See, I think, again, I've had, you and I have talked about addiction when I was on your show.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a moment in my 20s, a moment being about 3 years, that, alcohol really got a hold of me, and I didn't think I'd be able to get underneath it. I do smoke a lot of marijuana. But cocaine, I never had that, like, even in the very few times that I've done cocaine. Sure, it feels good. Sure, I'm into it. Yeah, talk. But I do reach a point where I'm like, all right, I'm good. I don't have that, like, fortunately,
I don't have an off switch.
I just want this to keep going. I'm usually like, all right, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't have an off switch, which is why, being a natural addict, that's why some of those drugs are really nerve-wracking because it's like, oh, you could really... I was fortunate enough to where alcohol was the thing that... Because cocaine and crack... boost my anxiety. Heroin was one of those things where I knew how dangerous it was. So after I did that, I snorted that a couple times. I was like, I have to stop doing this because this is going to get really bad really quickly. And I had lost friends to it already. So I was like, this isn't good. But drinking was one of those things where I just love, I mean, to this day, I love it so much that I was like, as soon as, I say it all the time, but like Frank the Tank, Will Ferrell's character in Old School,
right,
where he does the shot or he does the beer bong and he's like, as soon as it hits your lips, it's so good. And bring this full circle to the comedy we're talking about and stuff like that. That to me on the surface is hilarious because it's a funny scene, but means so much more to me because that's exactly the kind of person I am. As soon as it hits my mouth, I'm like, oh, we're okay, time to clock in, like we're going now. And so I just don't associate with any of it.
So, road comic from Florida. You moved to New York. You've lived here 2 years.
No, it's been longer than that now.
How long's it been?
It's been coming up on 4 almost.
Jeez. All right.
Yeah,
well,
where'd the time go?
So you decided
July of 21 is when I got here.
You wanted to take it more in a one-man show direction,
Yeah.
which you did, and you rented the space, and you spent all the money, and you did the whole thing.
Yeah, so I was doing a lot of the dark stuff on stage, and then you and I actually had sat down and talked about it. I was like, and I had some other friends who are really, really up there in comedy as far as like social media and followers and all that bullshit. But they tour, and they were like, hey, your stuff is too dark. Like, you should probably think about maybe billing it as a different thing other than stand-up, like we were talking about with the speaking. And I was like, well, maybe I'll do it as a one-man show. And again, I taking from Josh Wolf and Mike Birbiglia, I was like, this sounds like something that they did. That sounds like something that's feasible. And at the time when I had first moved here with my ex, I was financially in a pretty good space. Like, I had been sober for a few years. I had saved a bunch of money. My credit was good. So yeah, I just pulled out the credit cards and I was like, let's do it. So I rented the space. I hired a director, Rafael Pariah, and he helped me with it. And he meant a lot. He did a lot. And then I had some other comics and friends come out who I put as producers. And we put it on. The whole family flew up. It was insane.
So now what happens?
So then my girlfriend and I broke up a month before the one-man show was premiering. And so I had to then dump all of this money, not only into the show, because we're rolling. I hired a video crew and the whole thing. But then I also had to find my own place and move out. So all the funds got dried up. The original plan was to shop it to festivals.
Right. Well, that's why I think you should do it.
Yeah, but you need a lot of money to go to festivals. And I financially ruined myself because of the move and the show happening simultaneously. I just destroyed everything financially. So instead of doing that, I talked to a few people that I really value their opinion on that kind of stuff. And one of them was like, well, why don't you just put it out on YouTube? Bless you.
Excuse me.
And one of the things I didn't want to do is I didn't want to put it out on YouTube because then you can't submit to festivals once it has a wide release. So I put it out on Patreon first. Nobody watched it. I went on some big podcasts to promote it, and still nobody watched it. And then it got to the point where I was like, I'm not going to tour this. So I need this message to get out there because I think it could help people. Some of the people who did see it, and I posted some of the stuff, are messaging me like, you don't understand what this means to me, what this did for me. And I was like, I need to put this out. And so I just put it out on YouTube so people can find it there.
You may be surprised. I spent years working on a project that was very, very near and personal to me. It was a play that I wrote about Boy Scouts of America and the issue with child abuse right now. And I mean, who knows if anything will ever happen with it. But I do find, even if nothing comes out from that specific project, just going through that and exercising all of that and just saying it into a microphone and all of that, you may be surprised that your next project maybe isn't even as centered around it. I mean, like,
it's actually
maybe the universe is telling you, I've done this. What's next?
It's been a great learning experience. It's fun too because now I don't, like, if people ask me about that stuff, I can always just reference I'm always like, oh, the show's online, you can just go watch the show. Like my roommates, I live with 2 random roommates now that I found when my ex and I broke up, and I was telling them a story about getting arrested, and then they started asking all these questions, so I just sent them the link to the show, and then they were like, dude, this is insane, like, this is crazy, and it has been beneficial to some people, and also, probably the best thing just in this industry, was the ability to put something out there that's now got my name on it.
Yeah.
So like when you search Brennan Tasseff on Google, one of the first things that comes up is my IMDb page, and it says writer, creator of, and
Registered
told by
sex
or
offender.
yeah, right. But it has that all on IMDb, and it's for my show that I put on. So it's super cool because it's one of those things where 99% of the world doesn't give a shit. But for anybody who's like, hey, what's Brennan up to? And they look it up, they go, oh, this guy who's on the cusp of death is now on IMDb as somebody who wrote and produced his own fucking show.
How long is your show?
47 minutes and 23 seconds.
See, I would love to direct you in something that's more like a 20-minute version of it and get it sort of more condensed, slightly more punchy, but maybe do a night of like 3 kind of more personal one-person shows or something like that.
If we only knew someone who had plenty of stage time to do something like that.
Look for it coming to the Greenwich Village Comedy Club. Tell them about your podcast.
Oh, yeah. So, everybody, thank you. Oh, sorry, that's your job. I'm not hosting this one. At Brennan T Comedy on all social media, BrennanTComedy.com. The one-man show is also called, the podcast is Ex Drinking Buddy. The one-man show is also called Ex Drinking Buddy, a comic's look at life, near-death, recovery, and redemption. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm around the city.
And if you've made it this long, thank you for listening. I think this was a really cool interview. We talk all the time, and I feel like I learned shit about you today. So this is fun. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to have more queer comics and more queer adjacent comics coming up in future episodes. Thank you so much, y'all.
It's Drew Tessier's mostly queer comedy show.